right, everyone, welcome. Like Mary said, I am April Anderson, and you are joining us here today for a webinar called Integrating Teletherapy into Your Therapy Practice. So a little bit about myself. I graduated from Louisiana State University. Oh, this meeting is being live streamed. Okay. I love how Zoom gives you all the notifications.
Well, they want to make sure everybody knows. So yes,
a year ago, it was nothing.
I know.
People were jumping in and out of Zooms, and now it's like this is recorded. This is live stream.
So now we are on Facebook Live. So everyone, the world will see you all, and April and everyone else. So I'm going to go away and go back to April because you want to hear from her, not me. And I'm Mary Sadie, team member, and I head up the training here at Talk Tools.
Hey, thanks again, Mary. So I'm April Anderson. I graduated from Louisiana State University. Currently not acknowledging the football loss last weekend. I'm also a certified lactation counselor in addition to a speech language pathologist. I work early intervention and private clients in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. And I am the owner of InPerson Therapy, LLC. My disclosures, so I am receiving a speaker fee from Talk Tools, and then non-financial, I will be talking about something that's referenced in the presentation is a therapy model that we're doing in DC, but I'm not being paid to talk about it. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to talk about different types of therapy models, the benefits and the efficiency of teletherapy, roles and responsibilities, how they incorporate hybrid into your therapy practice, your virtual toolbox, and then some questions at the end. So I'd love to know either via the chat or if you want to unmute yourself, what was one thing that you learned in pandemic therapy besides how to prepare for the apocalypse? I felt like at first in early 2020, we were kind of all thrown into this, virtual world that we were all navigating together. And now a year later, people are using and learning different parts of, what virtual therapy taught us. So I'd love to know something that you learned either about yourself or about the type of therapy or just dealing with virtual therapy in general. Mary, I don't know how to see the chat on my end if someone is chatting.
I don't see anything. If anybody wants to talk about it, or if you just want to, I'll just monitor it. You can just, oh, here we go. We got something. Originally, I was not looking forward to teletherapy at all, but I like it now. And that's from Lisa.
All right. Thank you for sharing, Lisa. Yeah, I think we were all really caught off guard. I still joke that we talked about the 2-week shutdown and then a 2-week shutdown here in DC for early intervention. We're still 90%, I would say, virtual and doing teletherapy. So a lot of lessons have been learned in the last year. I think a lot of people have developed as therapists and had to get even more creative than typical. So we're going to talk a little bit about those things today. So there's different therapy models that we're going to talk about today. So your traditional in-person therapy. We're also going to cover teletherapy, and we're going to talk a little bit about a hybrid model of therapy. So just some general background things, in-person therapy, should this be considered the norm? Things that we have to consider for in-person therapy, the location of the therapy, consistency. We know sometimes clients don't show up for therapy appointments consistently, or you may live in an area where, traffic or other things cause you to cancel. Materials that are needed. Is there carryover occurring at home from the strategies that are being implemented in the therapy session? As well as the availability of the therapist. You know, maybe someone really wants to see a certain therapist, but has moved away, you know, that's going to make the commute a little bit too far, or a particular therapist needs to work with another therapist, an occupational therapist or someone. And so in-person therapy causes that to have a few barriers if you're trying to get everyone in one space. So talking just generally a little bit about teletherapy. So we know it has many names and one meaning. ASHA, our governing body, actually refers to it as telepractice. So you'll see that a little bit here when I'm referencing some things that ASHA says. But telepractice is the application of telecommunications technology to the delivery of speech language pathology and audiology professional services at a distance by linking clinicians to client patient or clinician to clinician for assessment, intervention, or consultation. So essentially, we're taking technology and we're linking two groups of people together. The pandemic brought it to the forefront, but it's not a new concept. Therapists have been doing virtual or teletherapy for years. You know, a lot of times in rural areas where it's hard to reach certain clients, but there are tons of practices that actually recruit for 100%, you know, telepractice, teletherapy jobs in schools and other venues. So some of the teletherapy benefits for therapists, convenience and flexibility, don't have to leave the house. It reduces travel for home-based therapists. It increases consistency of sessions, can service a variety of families that have different schedules, and it may increase parent involvement. Some of the benefits for families, again, that convenience, if they're trying to take Johnny to soccer and Sarah to piano, and they're working 9 to 6 sometimes, or kids are in daycares, sometimes having those virtual visits can really be more of a convenience factor for the family. Cost saving of travel, if they're having to take buses or trains or drive and park to get to therapy. There could be more carryover to the natural environment since sessions are typically occurring in their home. Increased levels of parent involvement, and then access to providers. So some of the effectiveness of teletherapy, I know this question has come up a lot, just kind of on some of the virtual platforms like Instagram and Facebook, of is teletherapy really working? And I know here in DC, as we're starting to slowly roll back into the swing of things, parents ask, you know, well, doing it virtual will be more convenient, but is it worth it and is it working? And so there's been various studies across disciplines that have shown positive results. Teletherapy is effective. The effectiveness has been documented for years. Again, the pandemic brought it to the forefront, but there have been therapists treating virtually for years. The services tend to be more family focused because there's a higher level of responsibility for the family. And it's been reported that it's the same level or increased amounts of parent and therapist satisfaction from doing teletherapy services. So why should you have to pick just one? Well, the main elephant in the room is insurance obstacles. Teletherapy is not always covered by all insurances, or maybe your clinic is accepting insurance, but it's not being accepted to happen outside of the clinic. I know sometimes, you know, even doing home-based sessions and not in the clinic changes the way insurance is logged. Licensure and reimbursement, you know, are you seeing someone in a different state or a different jurisdiction? Are you being reimbursed for those things either through, again, insurance, or are you contracting with a company? So that can definitely be a barrier to having some of those, choosing more virtual options. What's the technology available to the family? What's the level of distractions at home? Is their home a quiet place where they're able to focus on the therapy? Or are there so many other options and other things going on that it's hard to get the family and the child to engage in the therapy? And what's the level of parent engagement? So I wanted to include this. This is just some information from ASHA that talks a little bit about the roles and responsibilities of teletherapy. And so some main highlights, their document was very long. This is just some of the main highlights dealing with what the roles and responsibilities are. And so main things to highlight, it says that you definitely want to make sure you're understanding the technology that you're using. You want to make sure that they're appropriate and the appropriate technology is being used, and you're taking into consideration the client and disorder variables. One of the big ones, you want to be sensitive to cultural and linguistic variables that may affect the identification, assessment, treatment, and management of those communication disorders in individuals receiving telepractice. So making sure that the family that you're using telepractice or teletherapy with has access to the technology or understanding the technology, and able to implement those things. And then one that I, kind of chuckled at a little bit is being knowledgeable about existing rules, but also being able to manipulate and problem solve kind of what's going on if the therapy is not, if the technology isn't working. So selecting the appropriate client for teletherapy. What are some things to consider? We want to consider the potential impact of their physical and sensory characteristics. So is this a child that has hearing concerns? And again, their environment at home is much louder than the environment that the therapy would take place in the clinic. What's the visual ability? What's their physical endurance? So doing early intervention with clients virtually, we're not expecting these 2-year-olds to sit in front of a computer screen for up to an hour. But with maybe an older child, what's their sitting tolerance? What's their attention span? We also want to consider the level of cognitive functioning. So is the client on the other end of the screen really understanding what's going on without you being there to physically prompt them? And what's the willingness of the client and the caregiver to receive the services? So obviously, if you're suggesting telepractice or teletherapy with a family, we want to make sure that they're buying in to the reasoning behind why we want to do those things. Some other things to consider in terms of communication characteristics. So the comprehension level, the speech intelligibility level, availability of an interpreter. Again, in DC, since the start of the pandemic, so all of our early intervention sessions, for the most part, have been virtual. And so there have been times when we've had to get an interpreter because that's what you would do if you were in person. And so scheduling might make that a little bit easier, but it's a little less natural to have multiple people, in a Zoom room, and who's talking and who's interpreting and, who's saying what. And then one of the biggest for me is the client's resources. So again, we can't do teletherapy effectively with a family that doesn't have access to technology, access and availability to things like Wi-Fi that has an appropriate bandwidth, someone to facilitate it, having the appropriate environment for teletherapy or telepractice. So that's that quiet room where they can focus in, and then the ability to troubleshoot any technology. What are some of the parent and caregiver considerations? We want to gauge parent and caregiver receptiveness and readiness for learning. So this isn't just solely based on do they want to do virtual or not, but knowing it's going to increase a little bit of the parent's responsibility during the session. And are they receptive to that? And are they ready to take on some of that responsibility for learning? We want to help parents understand their child's strengths and their own parenting strengths. So sometimes if we are moving from in-person clinic-based therapy where maybe the parent sat in the waiting room and now we're doing therapy at home and the parent is in the room, they may have a different understanding of what level their child is at and what their strengths or weaknesses are. And so making sure that parents understand, exactly where their child is and, what goals you're going to reach to get them to another level. We want to recognize the greatest barriers to success and contributors to family strain. So again, that has to do with environment, that has to do with access to technology or access to food. And so making sure if we are going into the teletherapy direction, that the family isn't going against a lot of different barriers that are going to make the therapy success unattainable. And we want to make sure during teletherapy that we're focusing on the activity or the behavior or the skill that the child is working on. So it's really easy now that you have an inside look of what's going on at home to kind of get distracted by other things, or the parent wants to talk about other things. So really making sure that you're focusing on whatever the activity or whatever the skill is that the child is working on. So teletherapy and early intervention, talked a little bit about this earlier. So in DC, we use the parent coaching model. And if you've heard me talk for Talk Tools before, I've talked about using parent coaching and early intervention. And so coaching of parents can promote their confidence and competence in supporting child learning and development. And it's a more effective method of learning by doing. And so one of the things that we really found kind of in this shift from the pandemic is it's really putting, like I said, a lot more responsibility on the parents to facilitate some of these sessions, but also it's increased the amount of time and the understanding of the therapist being able to coach those parents to really increase their competence of implementing the strategies. And then I think the confidence from that really increases, because then they are able to see that they've made the success. I don't know how many times in person session, a therapist may go in and the child suddenly does something for the parent, and the parent may have been working on, getting the child to do that for the last couple of weeks or months. And so that can really be a blow to their confidence, but being able to talk them through different strategies and then having that child have success with them really lets them see that they have the ability and the competence to do those things. When we're doing teletherapy, it can include other family members. So during therapy sessions I've had where maybe dad was at work and he zoomed into the therapy session. Maybe the grandparents live in another state and they, are coming to visit in 2 weeks and really want to know what the strategies are that the child is working on. And so when you're really doing a virtual sense and kind of a open Zoom room for family, you can have other family members really listen in or participate in, so that the family is all on the same page with what the strategies are. It helps to target goals across different routines. And so in earlier intervention, it may be that you're only seeing the family on Tuesdays at 2:00, even though we would like to have more variety in the schedule. But that's the time that the family was available, or maybe that's the time that the therapist was available. But now being able to do things virtually, it's a little bit easier because of scheduling to target goals across different routines. So maybe have a session in the morning, have one in the afternoon, have the family complete different tasks. Teletherapy is more than just chatting with families. And so it's, although some of the families that I work with are using things like FaceTime or Duo, or, there's so many of them, WhatsApp and Hangouts. It's more than just having a conversation with the family. It's really doing that active coaching and talking through strategies, but then having the family implement the strategies in real time during the session. And it can help you gain information through pre-recorded videos. So for some of my families, a part of teletherapy is spending the first 5 or 10 minutes reviewing videos that maybe the family took while they were working on a certain activity or during a meal, and really kind of analyzing those videos of what things were working, what things were not working. And so it's not taking time away from the session. Those things that may have been done outside of the therapy session are now integrated into the therapy session. Early intervention was designed to assist the adults in a child's life and not the child. So it's really remembering that our job as therapists, when we're working with kids in early intervention, to really help these families assist the child. And so a child eating something once a week when the therapist is there, or only making a request once a week whenever they see their therapist, or only going up the stairs or touching the Play-Doh, isn't really helping the child develop over the course of their day and over the course of their week. And so really assisting the families to build their competence and their confidence helps the child in the long run. So let's talk a little bit about feeding therapy and telehealth. And so there could be different layouts of the session. So I just said, it can be a review of videos during the child of previous meals. A lot of the session could be parent education, reviewing goals and strategies, and what's the game plan for the session. It could be a live observation of the child eating. It can also help to break sessions into learning time and action time. Again, sometimes when you're in person, an hour can not feel like that long, but sometimes virtually, an hour feels like a long time and a lot of space to fill. So it's really thinking about, okay, is this learning time where we're talking about goals and strategies? And then what's the action time when we're going to take 25 to 30 minutes to have the meal, implement the strategies, and then come back with the parent and talk about what went well, what they struggled with, how did they think things went, and what's the plan for the next time. When we're doing teletherapy, we always want to make sure we're doing a kitchen check. And so texting the family the day before the session to see what foods are available to target goals during the session. And so we don't want to kind of go into the session and the session is started and now, mom needs to go to the kitchen and try to prepare things or find things, or, the child doesn't want that because they just had a snack 30 minutes ago. And so really doing those kitchen checks, whenever I'm confirming my session the day before, I always text and say, okay, here's our check. What foods are we working on tomorrow? What do we have? How are we presenting them? Just to be the most prepared during the actual therapy session. So what if the child wasn't the main star of the session? I have some teletherapy visits where the main focus for the majority of the time is just talking with the parent or the caregivers. And so we're discussing and working through overall routine and mealtime changes. We're helping parents identify and understand their own behavior. So this can be while reviewing videos, and maybe there's a recurring theme of something that the parent is saying. And so it's really helping them to understand their own behavior during a time when maybe the child isn't present in the video screen, or maybe even not present in the room at that time. Parents can start to incorporate changes at home from day one. So if you're having a telehealth visit with a parent, they can implement some of those same strategies later that night at dinner versus maybe in an in-person session. If it was done in a clinic, it's harder for the parent to conceptualize how they're going to implement those things at home because maybe the setup is different or the food that was offered is different. We know in feeding therapy that some kids just need a gentle push in the right direction. And so that might be small changes that's done by the family of, how they're serving the meals. Maybe they're not sitting down together and having family meal time. Maybe the parents are just really burnt out and they're just kind of making the kid a peanut butter sandwich every night and not understanding why they're not requesting other foods. So sometimes it's really just having the family understand what small changes that can be made at home with them as it relates to their child's feeding. And maybe that's just the gentle push that the child needs if there's not any kind of skill or developmental delay. So speech therapy and telehealth. We really want to think about what are the goals for the client. There are a lot of goals, and we're going to talk a little bit later in this presentation about our virtual toolbox and things that we can use. And some goals are going to be easier to implement in a virtual setting than others. Thinking about articulation goals or answering WH questions are going to be a little bit more straightforward of doing in a virtual sense than maybe some pragmatic things. If you don't, have other people there, you're not walking the child around the clinic to say hi to different people in different environments. And so it's really take some forward thought of how you're going to implement those goals and what goals are being targeted in that telehealth session. Having telehealth sessions can reduce the scheduling nightmare. We know as things have shifted back to in person and schools are back open and kids are back playing soccer and having piano lessons and all of those different things after school, that having some of these virtual visits might reduce some of that scheduling Tetris that parents play, as well as therapists. We also want to make sure that we're identifying the developmental level and the independence of the child that we're working with. And so some older children who may be more independent to be able to sit at the computer on their own and follow directions, versus we're dealing with a child that has some developmental challenges and need more parent supervision or parent involvement, and just how would that session look and what's the length of time and where is it taking place. It's also thinking about when we think about telehealth, are we dealing with an older child who drools? So like I said, the independence of the child, or are we dealing with a younger child who may have autism? So how do we think about incorporating a hybrid approach? And so next, I'm going to talk a little bit about the hybrid approach that I've been using in my own therapy practice. A lot of this came from the shift in the pandemic, but then also just some successes that I was seeing working with certain families. So typically what I do is I do an in-person assessment for all children when it's applicable. And then some kids or families, we may choose to have all therapy sessions in person, just because that's what the family is requesting or what we think based on the goals would work better for that particular family. Following the assessment, all of my families partake in a learning session prior to the start of therapy that's virtual. So we do the assessment, we identify the goals, and then to really get the families ready and prepared, we do a learning session. So, okay, here are the goals that we're going to target. Here's the expectations for the sessions, whether they're in person or virtual. Here's the timing. Here's the materials that are going to be required. Here's time for me to talk about my approach to feeding therapy or speech therapy for parents to ask questions. So really kind of getting some of that out of the way proactively before really jumping into the therapy sessions. So I have kids that fall in a couple of different options. So option one, I'll have kids where I'll see them for 5 sessions in person, and then I'll see them once or twice a month virtual. So that might be every other session. That might just be 1 session a month that's virtual, but those first 5 sessions happen in person. The second option is I have kids that I see 10 sessions in person. We'll do a midway pulse check. That's kind of that virtual learning session again. And then all remaining sessions are virtual. And when families are using that kind of 10 sessions in person, it's usually done with 2 sessions a week if we're really kind of doing a boot camp of sessions, because the parent is going to take some of that responsibility from there. And option 3, all sessions are virtual after the initial assessment. So sessions are done weekly or twice a week for 1 hour. Parents participate in the sessions from the beginning. The last 10 to 15 minutes of all sessions are used for that parent overview, again, regardless if it's an in-person session or a virtual session. And then during virtual sessions, that can include mealtime observation of strategies using a hidden camera. So sometimes for my kids, our 1 virtual session a month is just me on a, muted myself on a FaceTime, and the camera's kind of in the salad bowl where the child can't really see. And I'm really just observing 30 minutes of the family mealtime and watching kind of in real time how the family's incorporating the strategies. And, we all know kids react differently when the therapist is there, when dad's there, when sister's there. And so really kind of getting a real time view of what mealtime looks like from a feeding standpoint, or what a practice time looks like if they're working on speech goals. Sometimes my virtual sessions can be parents running their own session of food school or food practice, where they're taking 20 to 30 minutes to really sit and work on targeted foods, again, using those same goals and those same strategies that have been talked about in previous therapy session times. And the client can practice speech sounds using different tools and activities, maybe in an independent sense, or working with the therapist. So some things that I've learned. I've seen faster carryover of strategies from parents. So that doesn't necessarily mean that kids are reaching their goals faster, but it's shown me that the parents are really understanding the strategies and understanding the why and understanding the philosophy behind those things, and are able to implement those strategies when we've shifted to any kind of virtual sessions that requires their involvement. It's that big parent empowerment and understanding piece. So, they're responsible for doing it on their own at home. And so when we're having those virtual sessions, they're really taking heed to that responsibility and that ability to have to play that role. It's looking at quality over quantity. So for my kind of 10 package kids right now, I'm meeting with a little boy. There's a lot of Jewish holidays in September. And so his school is closed once or twice a week over the next couple of weeks. And after that, it's a real scheduling nightmare of going to occupational therapy and ABA therapy and 2 different school programs, and he plays soccer. And so based on the assessment and what the family and I, kind of came up with, is doing these kind of 10 session crash course. There's different goals that are being identified and worked on within each session. Mom is taking notes and then, recording even while I'm in person parts of the sessions, so that after those 10 sessions are completed and it switches over to virtual, mom and dad have a better understanding of how to implement those strategies, things that need to be done, how to work on things. And it just kind of gives the kid a little bit of a boost of what they need to be working on. Now, and again, this is with a child that, doesn't have any skill deficits. He just has some oral aversions, some behavioral concerns, some mealtime concerns, but then also has really learned how to play into, if I scream loud enough, they will give me tortilla chips and I can just eat the tortilla chips on my own during meal times. Other things that I've learned from kind of switching over to this hybrid in-person virtual model, the parents are more engaged during the virtual sessions because they know they're going to have to implement those things after the sessions. Kids are learning to generalize skills. And so when I worked fully in person in a clinic, I found that from a feeding standpoint, it was much harder for families and kids to generalize eating in a clinic to then eating at home, especially if the parents weren't doing a lot of carryover of the strategies and things like that at home. How many times have we heard from a feeding standpoint of, oh, I eat chicken for, Miss April, which is what a little boy told me this morning, even in his in-person session at home. And so having some of those virtual sessions where you're not physically in the home during those sessions and the parent is taking the lead role can help kids learn to generalize, oh, I eat for Miss April and I eat for mommy and I eat for daddy and I eat for the daycare teacher or the teacher at school or the babysitter. It can also help families move away from what I like to call throwing spaghetti at the wall. And so I have all these strategies and I have all these things that people have told me, and I have all these things that I can do. So we're just going to do them all at one time and kind of see what happens and see what sticks. And so doing this mix of in-person and virtual really helps families to kind of hone in and focus on what goals are we working on? Why are we working on these goals? What am I doing now and what comes next? And they feel like they have a little bit more of a guideline of where we are and where we're going. And like I said, I think when you have a little skin in the game in terms of it's their responsibility or they're taking on more responsibility during those virtual sessions, it's much easier for them to focus on the things that they are doing and how that relates to the therapy goals that are trying to be met. The end goal of feeding therapy should be happy family mealtimes where strategies have been seamlessly incorporated. So many of our families only know therapy and lose joy surrounding other interactions or routines. And so a lot of times in feeding, it's okay, we got to do this strategy, or first we do this, and then we do this, and we do this. And family mealtime kind of has gone out the window, and meal times are looking a lot like a therapy session. And so how do we separate this very structured therapy session to family meal times, especially if there are other kids or other people involved in meal times during the time that maybe they're not involved in during therapy. And so for me, I always say that, the goal is for kids not to be here for 6 months or 6 years. Obviously we have some kids that it's going to take them much longer to reach some of their goals just based on, their starting base and, what their challenges are. But for other families, the goal should be happy meal times, and how do we get them from this highly structured therapy session to seamlessly incorporating these strategies into their meal times. Can't see the chat. Not sure if there are any questions so far.
I'm not seeing any, April. And I'm looking at Facebook too.
Okay, great. All right. So talking about clients that teletherapy visits may be appropriate for, or maybe they're a good candidate. So client A, Amelia. She's 12 years old. She's very gifted and an independent student. She actually had a frenectomy 3 months prior to the start of therapy. And part of that was because she went to the orthodontist to get braces, and the orthodontist said that her tongue was just continuously, sitting and thrusting against her teeth. And that was part of the reason why she needed braces. And there were some other oral motor concerns that hadn't really been targeted or addressed up to this point. But she needed to work on her articulation skills, her oral motor skills, and there were lots of drooling concerns, obviously. But there was a high level of family involvement. So would Amelia be a good candidate for teletherapy? Yes. So the client is motivated and independent. The therapist can use visuals such as modeling and videos to show oral motor strategies. The client can locate materials in the house for use for sessions, and a reduced number of sessions may be needed. And so if this is an older child, like I said, who really just needs some general help of, what is my tongue supposed to be doing? How do I swallow? Can I, now that my tongue has the ability to move, how do I practice moving it around to kind of help with those articulation skills, but truly independent and gifted. And then there's high level of family involvement. So her family were sitting in during the sessions, listening, taking notes, and then able to implement some of those same carryover strategies during times when this therapy session was not taking place. Client B, Benji. So Benji is 2.5 years old. He has autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. Both parents are highly involved in his therapy. And Benji's receiving other therapies outside of kind of speech and feeding therapy with myself. And so would he be a good candidate for teletherapy? The answer is yes. The parents would benefit from parent coaching. He's still in that young early intervention age. And so the parents can benefit from some general information about his development, but about how to implement some strategies into routines, how to implement strategies into just their daily occurrences, thinking about behavior and thinking about language. So they would benefit from parent coaching, and they're also highly involved. Doing teletherapy allows the therapist to observe Benji in his natural environment. So the therapy sessions are taking place at home versus Benji getting in a car, and then he's driving 35 minutes to the clinic, and he's getting out of the car and he's transitioning into the clinic. What we know about a lot of kids who have autism is transitions are difficult for them. And so being able to have this virtual therapy session at his house takes down some of the number of transitions that he has to make. And so then maybe we're just going from this activity to that activity, or this room to that room. Virtual therapy sessions also help to provide parents with immediate feedback in situations. Again, sometimes when we're doing in-person therapy, the parent becomes a spectator and they're not really an active participant. And so especially in that young early intervention age, having the parent be an active participant in the activities that are going on allows the therapist to give the parent or caregivers immediate feedback of, okay, you're doing this. Why don't we think about doing it this way? How did he respond? Okay, let's try again. And client C, Clara. Clara is 4 years old. She suffers from picky eating and lots of mealtime behaviors. She has no previous formal therapy. Again, just really, really picky. One parent is very concerned and engaged, and the other parent, said she'd grow out of it, sit her at the table till she eats, kind of some of those comments that we hear often in the feeding world. My favorite is send her the grandmas and grandma will get her to eat. She also has an older and a younger sibling. So there's 3 children in the house at mealtime. So would Clara be a good candidate for teletherapy? Yes. Parents would benefit from family coaching and, again, observation. How are the parents reacting when she's not eating, or she's refusing to eat, or she's saying no, or throwing things onto the floor? Parents can also make real immediate change at home during meal times before more targeted therapy may be needed. So it's not saying that Clara, doesn't need to come in and do some targeted feeding therapy, but what's her environment like at home surrounded by meal times? Kids only know what they've been reinforced and what they've been taught. And so some of Clara's challenges were really stemming from her environment and the things that were occurring. Also, when you think about having virtual visits and the parents are at home, both parents are able to listen in on sessions and incorporate the same strategies. So sometimes parents will trade off and it's one parent or the other. But when I can get both parents in a session, or both parents and the nanny and grandma, whoever's spending time with the child, everyone's able to kind of listen in on the sessions, and then everyone's hearing the same thing. So sometimes therapy strategies can become the telephone game of, oh, I think the therapist said to say this, and then I'm going to tell it to someone else. And I think the therapist said to say this. So we know sometimes information can get lost in translation, but when you have both parents involved kind of in a virtual sense, then they're able to listen to what the therapist is saying in real time and incorporate the same strategies. Also, in a virtual sense, I have one of my parents where dad, can't make the sessions because he's working outside of the home. Mom is at home with the child, and we actually then record, kind of like Mary's doing now, our Zoom screen recording sessions, and then dad's able to watch them on his own after the session has occurred, and then kind of use those as a bank of information to ask questions about how to incorporate some of the strategies. All right. So the next thing I'm going to talk about are virtual tools to add to your teletherapy toolbox. So a lot of these work great while in person, and you may be doing a lot of them in person already. But these are some of my favorite things that I use for my virtual sessions, my hybrid sessions, or just to bring a little bit of technology into my in-person sessions, because then remember, those things are sometimes easier for parents to carry over because they're not having to go out and buy a specific game. They're just kind of pulling up an app or pulling up something that you sent to them. So Chatty Picks is an app that I really like, especially for feeding therapy. And so we'll see if my video works. If you don't know what Chatty Picks is, this is kind of just their little YouTube advertisement. All right. Oh, no, there we go. So reasons why I like Chatter Picks. It's very interactive. It's easy to change the picture. So as you saw from the kind of YouTube advertisement, you just take a picture of something, you draw a mouth on, you give it a voice or some words. Usually in feeding therapy, I take a picture of the client and then I voice yum, 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 or it's good, or I like to eat broccoli, so that we're using positive language such as Jamie is eating broccoli. Oh, let's feed Jamie the broccoli. Look how Jamie is eating the broccoli. And it's using that positive speech for the child. I'm not asking them, oh, take a bite of broccoli. Here's this. We're feeding Jamie the picture, the broccoli on the screen. And sometimes we'll start off by, maybe it's a stuffed dinosaur toy, or maybe it is, mom or dad initially, but they always try to jump into taking a picture of the child and then having them feed themselves and start saying things like Jamie is eating the broccoli. And although this is fun and interactive, it really keeps the attention on the food, right? Because now we're touching the food and we're picking up the food to feed it to Jamie on the screen. And oh, Jamie needs a smaller piece. That one's too big. Let's break up a piece, or let's dip it in something. Oh, now we can give it to Jamie. So it really keeps the attention on the food. It helps us to continue to talk about the food without kind of getting distracted by other things. The next one is Tiny Tastes. I actually used this one this morning. It's a really cool, very interactive app. So again, I'm gonna play just their little promo movie.
With Tiny Tastes, eating and drinking well is both fun and rewarding as kids get to share their very own food with their new friend Tiny. As she models healthy eating, your child will be inspired to join along. Children can earn coins to pick cool things out for Tiny to use. Let's take a look. In the store, kids get to choose fun items for Tiny to use during the story or while eating. Studies show that when kids have more choices during mealtime, they tend to be more invested in the eating process. Tap on Tiny to start a choose your own adventure story that explores Tiny's world. At several points throughout the story, your child will get to choose how they would like to continue on their adventure. This means there's a different experience each time through, and even more storylines and story options will be added into the app soon. After a fun trip around the yard with Tiny, your child can join her for a meal or snack by selecting to either eat or drink with Tiny, depending on which one your child needs more help doing. Here you can suggest things like, now it's time to feed Tiny, or let's share some eggs with Tiny and see how she likes them. The goal is just to let them get used to eating with Tiny and starting to be inspired to taste more healthy foods together. We hope you and your child love trying new things with Tiny.
So similar to Chatter Picks, Tiny Taste is very interactive and kids like it. So although we aren't saying Jamie's eating the broccoli, we can say, oh, look, Tiny's eating the broccoli. I really like to start this off with kids who may be more hesitant. Maybe these are the kids who it's been so long since they've even sat at the table with foods that were not their preferred foods to eat, just because of behaviors or aversions. So it's great because Tiny goes on this little adventure and you can read different parts of the story. And then, oh, she's very hungry after her nap. So we need to give her something to eat. Even ease into the eating portion of that. So like the promo said you can select different spoons and bowls. And so with, again, my more hesitant kids, we'll use that to say, okay, now we picked the pink spoon for Tiny. Now, are you going to get the pink one or the blue one? All right, now we've got to get a plate. Now we have to get a bib. Now we have to get some food. So it's really to take some of that direct attention, especially if the family has previously been using unsuccessful strategies like take a bite, take a bite, take a bite, take a bite. It's really just putting that focus somewhere else. The app is really easy to follow and it's easy to navigate. And I have kids, again, who are developmentally on par, who are 4, 3 or 4. We know kids can really operate these iPad apps sometimes better than older adults. And so they're able to turn the pages to the story. And like I said, it's interactive. So it's, do you want her to go visit the squirrel at the tree, or do you want her to go to the lake, and really making those different choices. And there's just lots and lots of options. So as kids eat with Tiny, at the end of the eating period, which you set for how many minutes, is it 2 minutes? Is it 5 minutes? Is it 25 minutes? And Tiny really eats according to that time. And they'll say, you're all done. I tried some, didn't try any today. And if the child tried some, or, even if the child that I'm working with didn't try anything on their plate, but they sat and they interacted, I'll still select on the app that they tried some. And then they actually earn different coins, and the coins can be used at the Tiny shop to buy different spoons or shirts or hats and those things. And so it really can be used across different sessions of doing different parts of it with for different lengths of time with different kids to really ease them into the idea of feeding therapy or sitting at the table or being around different foods, especially if they hadn't had the opportunity to do that before. The next app I like to use is called Speech-a-Ruse, Funny Directions by Speech-a-Roo. I'll use this in both my feeding sessions and in just general speech therapy sessions.
Take the fish and give it to the bird. No, that's your find the water bottle and give it to the crab. Golly, I was so thirsty. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Get the beach ball and take it to the fish.
So I'm going to do it incorrectly on purpose.
Take it to the fish.
And then they'll keep repeating it. And it gives me a little shake. So why I like this app, you can work on naming and labeling. So the balloons, the 1, 2, and 3, just select 1-step, 2-step, or 3-step directions. So the picture scenes stay the same, but if I'm working with older children on speech and language, I can say, oh, let's tell a story about what we see and what's happening. Let's label all the different things. Although it's working on WH questions and it does a little silly thing or says a little, snippet of something after you complete the activity correctly, for kids who may not be working on WH questions or they may be too simple for them, it's used as a great reinforcement. And so I have kids where, and there's 10 items kind of in each little balloon bubble, and they stay mostly the same, although every time you play, they'll go in a different order. So if you're always doing 2-step directions at the beach, it won't happen in the same order, but for the most part, you're giving the water bottle to the crab and the ball to the fish and those types of things. But I'll have kids where maybe we're answering a question or we're doing some other activity, and then we're going to do 2 of these because kids like it because it's funny and it moves and it makes sounds. Sometimes during eating, if I have a kid that's working on kind of a picture schedule in terms of, we wash our hands, we sit down, now it's eating time, and then we kind of get to our first little break. Sometimes having something short and interactive like that, like, okay, we're going to do 3 of these, or we're going to do 5 of these, or maybe we do all 10 of them, then able to segue back into eating can just be a great reinforcement, or just kind of a brain break activity. And when I'm doing this virtually, sometimes I will hold the iPad up so that then they can see me holding it and doing it, and they tell me what to do. But then also, because I have a Mac, I can screen share from the iPad to the computer, and then kind of screen share again, like we are here in Zoom, so the child can see it. So even though they're not the one physically always moving their finger, like I said, it's really reinforcing to kids because it's silly and funny, and I've played it hundreds of times, and I still chuckle at some of my favorite ones. Right. So the next app, I'm sure is pretty well known or among speech therapists, but it's called Articulation Station. I don't have a video of this one, but just to talk about how this works in a virtual sense, is parents can purchase just the target letter and work on it at home. So if you have a child that has an iPad, and I get a lot of parents that ask me, you know, what are some good apps for therapy, or what are good apps for learning? It's nice because they can purchase just, you know, if you're just working on L's or just working on R's, they can purchase just those letters and they can work on them at home. And so in a virtual sense, I might have the app with me, and then the app, they're playing the same app at home on their iPad with the parents. Or again, I'm screen sharing on a virtual screen, and they're telling me, you know, which card to select so that we can flip it over and do matching. There's different options like storytelling. So you listen to a story with target words, or if it's an older child, maybe they're reading the words to the story with those target words, with those target sounds. And then there's questions at the end of each story, and there's different levels of the story. And it's also nice because you can track accuracy within the app. And so I'll use this app in a lot of my in-person sessions as well, due to COVID, when you're trying to not bring too many different things into some of those in-person sessions. It's nice for me to have the iPad with me that has 2 or 3 different game options on it. I know I'm going to play Funny Directions, we're going to play Articulation Station, and then it can just track different accuracies for Articulation Station right in the app. Right. Next are boom cards, which really became, to me, more popular since the shift to more of this kind of virtual learning, you know, pandemic, distance learning, those types of things. Why I like them, there are many, many, many different options. If you just Google the word boom cards, you are going to get lots of options. You'll get options on their online classroom to set up an account and earn, you know, the different points and things like that. There's so many different ones on Teachers Pay Teachers. You know, there's lots of options. Some of the fancier ones are animated, where the pictures actually jingle and move, which can be engaging and entertaining for kids during therapy. These can be used in therapy or at home. So if you're in an in-person session, again, using it on an iPad or something like that, you know, not printing it out. If you're in a virtual sense, again, screen sharing and showing those different things, but then also at home for that carryover, because then the child that you're working on it with can kind of go in and download the different packages and things like that. And I like them because they can be used to target many different goals. And so, you know, we don't have to do 20, you know, have 20 different things of materials, or, you know, have all these different activities, but one kind of card can be used for articulation and WH questions, and, you know, describing scenes, and kind of really getting more bang for our buck of doing many different things using those same materials. to really, like I said, target so many different goals that the child might have. Other ideas of just games and videos. So YouTubing videos of songs, we all had Baby Shark ingrained in our brains at one point. I made the joke the other day that the one thing I miss about going into different daycares from an early intervention standpoint is at least I, got to hear some different songs. Now I feel like everyone's kind of playing the same songs over and over again at home, because every kid is in love with Coco Melon, and I need stock in Coco Melon. We can use different physical materials and play for the client, right? So if we're using plastic food, or, we're using a game, we're showing the client, and then we're moving the piece for them virtually on a screen, is still just as engaging, even if they're not physically touching the pieces and moving it. If the family has the same game or material, we can plan to use those things. So I've had kids where we've played Guess Who together. So they have their own, board of Guess Who, and I have mine. We're making something together virtually with Play-Doh. Okay, can you make a shark? I'm going to make a shark. Or look, what did I make? Who's it for? Kind of working on those things with those same, easy materials or, common materials that parents and caregivers might have at home. Using interactive storybooks and interactive game boards. So things online, again, you can YouTube different storybooks. Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus is a really big one, and it's really interactive, and someone has spent a whole lot of time on some of these storybooks, making them move and, seem like a YouTube interactive video that the child may want to watch, but could be a learning opportunity to target those goals. And then Kindle books. I have a Kindle membership, and so there are a lot of children's books on Kindle that make it really easy, again, to kind of pull up those things, screen share. Now we're looking at storybooks, and there's lots of different options, so that we don't always have to have that physical copy of the book in front of us if we're going into the home for an in-person session or in the clinic, but also if we're doing it from a virtual sense. We can make things via PowerPoint, kind of like this presentation is now. I like doing Prezzies for older kids to keep them engaged. Prezzy is a little bit more of a time suck, I find, and time consuming to make, but it's super interactive. If you're copying and pasting a story because you are working on inferencing or answering questions and those different things, sometimes just having the different pieces move around is engaging to older kids that I work with. If, like I said, we're just kind of working on, some of those higher level cognitive skills. We can use PowerPoint to show a visual schedule of activities. So in my virtual sessions, in my in-person sessions, I use a schedule with a lot of kids. Like I said, we wash hands, and then we sit down, and then we eat, and then we do this. So when we're doing those virtual sessions, I have those same pictures, and then I put them on PowerPoint slides. And so just as we're screen sharing here, I'll screen share during those sessions with them and say, okay, well, now we're doing this, and then we're doing this, and then we're doing that. And so having things move and wiggle goes a long way with kids, keeping them engaged in what we're doing and what we're talking about. We can use PowerPoint to create our own social stories, copying other social stories, again, making it move, making it interactive. It's really easy to screen share when you're on PowerPoint. And there are lots of options online for activities that can be integrated into PowerPoint. For older kids, we can have clients find an item in the room. So if we're working on inferencing, find something big and red and that you roll. Maybe there's a ball that you see hidden on the shelf. So they can really kind of get up and move and go find things in their room. So we don't have to have certain specific materials. We're kind of using what's available to us. Working on following directions. So they're listening on the screen. Again, maybe they're standing up. So they're not just sitting in front of the computer screen. having them describe something and then drawing a picture of what they're describing and then showing it to them, and then you describing something for them. Maybe they draw a picture or they go find it. Describing picture scenes or videos. Again, this is an easy one to really pull up videos on YouTube and share them. Pulling up picture scenes that don't require a whole lot of physical materials as if you were doing a session in person or in a clinic. So pulling up different things, going back to the PowerPoint, if that's, I know that's what we're kind of working on in the schedule, then I like to just copy and paste those scenes right into the PowerPoint. So then I know as we're clicking through, we're going to do the scenes and like, all right, now there's 3 scenes done. And then it's going to the next picture in the schedule of what the next activity might be. We can also read a physical book. So I can be sitting on a screen and I can have a physical hard copy of a book that I'm reading to the client or the client and the caregiver. So maybe it's taking a little bit away of that visual sense of I'm going to read this book and not show you the pictures. And then I want you to listen and, jot things down and answer questions or draw a picture of what I'm talking about. And really just for older kids, we know making it interactive, making it fun, using, again, what the client has available. But there are lots and lots and lots of online resources, probably more so now than maybe even a year or 2 ago, as kind of collectively the world shifted to do virtual therapy. If you just search speech therapy, virtual, or teletherapy, or, following directions, or, really anything into a Google search, you're going to get lots and lots of options. And there are a lot of free options out there. So tracking information and then reinforcement. So using free printable behavior charts website. That's one that's listed in the resources. I like to go to literally freeprintable-behavior-charts.com, pull up charts that maybe I know a kid likes, and then I can turn that handout into a PDF and I can edit that during the session. Oh, good job, you earned a star. I'm going to put a star on, I'm going to color it, yellow. Also being able to kind of track data during a virtual session, is a little bit easier, because even if you're screen sharing, we know that then there are other screens that you can have open, or if you're not screen sharing and you're just talking to the client or doing the session, being able to take notes and kind of track data is a little bit easier because you're able to do it in a little bit more real time versus maybe jotting something down in the notebook if you were in person and then having to transfer that onto an electronic database. Using physical items as you would in a clinic, such as earning items to build a Mr. Potato Head. So, okay, here's Mr. Potato Head and we're going to do these things. Oh, good job. You answered some questions. Here's an arm. Here's a hat. Here's some feet, right? So those things are still interactive and still reinforcing, just as they would be in an in-person session in a clinic. And then there's lots of online tracking and note-taking. I got a new iPad that I can write on kind of with a stylus pen and transfer that. I can email it and it types it up and transfers it. There's lots of online just kind of tracking sites and apps and things like that as you're doing things, kind of keeping everything in that virtual world. Or some people prefer to have a virtual session and still have those physical kind of hard copy handwritten notes. So using a green screen, so we can keep it simple. We can project an image as your background. Earlier, Mary had a really nice lake and some trees as her screen, and I wish I was at the lake. And so we can project, SpongeBob behind us if a child is really into that, or the galaxy if we want to talk about describing those types of things. But then I've seen some really, really complex ones, especially as I was putting this presentation together of, people actually using green screens and, having little folders where things went in and it was like, whatever was being projected was eating it. So there's various props and objects, and it can be something super simple as changing your Zoom background during a virtual session to things that are a whole lot more complex. It's really kind of being creative and using the tools and the knowledge that you have. So some different takeaways, kind of the conclusion of this presentation, which went a lot faster than I thought. Not one shoe fits all, right? So lots of families could benefit from some level of teletherapy, but maybe complete virtual sessions would not work for every family. And so it's really thinking about what elements of teletherapy in terms of promoting families to have that independence and have some of that responsibility and that carryover of strategies could they benefit from while at home, even if they're still coming into the clinic or having in-person sessions for most of their sessions. We want to make sure we're being creative and not being afraid to learn things on the go. So like I said, there are many resources out there. And so maybe you're learning this new tool, or you want to find this new game, or a client is now into robots this week, and there are lots of boom cards and things like that on robots. So not being afraid to kind of step outside of your comfort zone and learn on the go. Incorporating virtual activities into in-person sessions. So sometimes even with that, it's taking away from maybe the paper that you're using or the amount of materials that you have to clean after a session, still dealing with COVID protocols if you're going into an in-person session. And, there are many pieces of a Mr. Potato Head that now you can't, use with the next client until they've been disinfected kind of fully, or we're missing pieces and things like that. Having virtual in terms of using a reinforcement on an iPad or reading a storybook allows for a quicker wipe down of that one item to be able to bring it into the next session. One day, I don't know when that day is, but one day I think most things that were in person prior to 2020 will go back to being in person fully. I even think about for early intervention, and yes, we use coaching model and things like that here, and we're still mostly virtual, but there will be one day where, semi-virtual is not an option just because the way early intervention services here are delivered. And so how can I minimize the things that I'm taking from one place to another? We want to always just make sure that we're encouraging families to practice at home. So even if you're doing all in-person sessions or all in-clinic sessions, really encouraging families to practice at home, to be proactive, to do some of those carryover things, even if you're not there watching them or you're not there to supervise them or help them out. Really encouraging them to do those things at home and, download that app or make a copy of that paper. So it's not that you're kind of sending information home in vain, but that they are actually incorporating those things. And don't reinvent the wheel. So use the many available and mostly free resources online. Like I said, I put a lot of the websites that had really good kind of concise information about teletherapy or virtual options or online options in this presentation. And I thought this was really funny. No thanks pants, I'm working from home today. Except really make sure that you are wearing pants or appropriate bottoms if you're doing teletherapy with early intervention kids and you decide to stand up and dance or do some baby shark and things like that. There's still lots of funny videos out there of people forgetting that they aren't wearing pants or appropriate bottoms, and then they kind of get up to get coffee or start dancing or chase the dog away. And so virtual is really nice, it's flexible, it's convenient to be at home, but there are lots and lots of benefits for not only the therapist but benefits for the family when you are incorporating these different kind of virtual options. All right, and then I have some resources and just some references for you guys. Are there any questions? Any information anybody wants to share, or tools or resources?
Yeah, does anybody have any tips you want to share with this little group here? Or you could, provide them later. We're going to have this is recorded, and we're going to trim it up and make it pretty and put it on our website, so it can be a free resource you can refer to with your parents and clients when you get stuck or you want some ideas. It's as you know, this is something that obviously April does a lot, and she's come up with some really great creative resources, and I think it's helpful. And I think with the world will go back, but some things might stay in this space a little bit longer. Like I think you made some good examples of the one parent was at home with the child and the other parent is not able to see, and then they're able to be involved in that way. So
yeah, I do a lot of recorded sessions. Most of my kind of virtual teletherapy sessions are recorded either for the main parent caregiver to look back on what was talked about and what was discussed, or kind of rewatching things in real time, or if there's a parent or caregiver that's not able to make the sessions, they're able to kind of observe and see different pieces of what went on.
And I have to say, I kind of love the no pants reference. We've seen a lot of that, especially in the beginning. I think people are more ready, even at work. You see it with when you're on a virtual call or meeting, Zoom, and you see somebody and you've heard the stories of what people should not be doing on Zoom. So yeah, that was a cute little fun fact to remember. I don't see any other questions, I think, because you covered it all so well. And as we move through the new world and whatever is going to happen the rest of this year and into probably 2022, these are great resources that April has provided. And like I said, this will be available on our website, and we will start building our free resource library. We kind of neglected it here for a while. So I think that's it for everyone. Any questions, any last parting words or anything?
Thanks for everyone who signed on to the Zoom, everyone who may be watching Facebook Live, or watching this later recorded. Thank you to Mary and Talk Tools for asking me to talk a little bit about this. And I just hope everyone's surviving the still continual topsy-turvy of unexpected and ever changing and sometimes getting better and sometimes seeming worse virtual therapy world.
And just a plug, you'll see April next month and some other fabulous people that we've gathered together for our Feeding First conference. You can go on the Talk Tools website to see and register. We've got, I think 20 some people. So speakers and a whole bunch of activities. So again, that's the end of October, and April's going to be speaking as well. So thanks everyone. I hope you have a good rest. I don't know where y'all are joining us from, so good rest of your day, and we'll see you on our next webinar or conference or workshop or whatever we're doing. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.